In today's video, I'm going to run through creating a form in Microsoft Forms, which allows the responders to attach files with their submission. After the form has been completed, we can then look at how we can use Microsoft Flow to capture the responses with the attachments in a Sharepoint list. To get started, let's create a new form in Microsoft Forms. Click on the New Form button. This will take you to a blank form. Then enter a name for the form by clicking on the Untitled Form label. The name of the form helps identify where the attachments are saved later on. You can now add some questions to the form. In this example, I am just going to add a name field to capture the person's name. We can now go and add the file upload question to the form. To do this, click on the Add New button. Forms will provide some other ideas for questions. Click on the drop-down arrow and select the file upload. Forms will now confirm that it will create a folder in your OneDrive where the attachments will be saved. Click on Yes to continue. You can now enter a question, and in this example, I will just use upload attachments. You're also provided some other options such as the number of files that can be uploaded and the maximum size of each file. Currently, this is limited to 10 files up to 1 gig each. How the form looks and to try submitting a response, click on the preview button. So that we can see how the attachments work, I'm going to submit a response and attach some files. Once the files have finished uploading, we can click on the Submit button. Now that the response has been submitted, we can go to OneDrive and see where the files are stored. In OneDrive, go to the Apps folder, then to Microsoft Forms. You should then see a folder with the name of the form that we created. Then open the question folder. You should now see the documents that were attached to the form. Now that we've created the form and can see that the attachments are saving, we can now work on capturing the responses to any questions and the attachments in a Sharepoint list. I'm going to use a Sharepoint list that I've already created. However, if you're interested in seeing how I created the list in the first place, please leave a comment below. The name of the list that I will be using is called Form Responses. I will be using Microsoft Flow to save the response and attachments to the list in SharePoint. To get started, open Microsoft Flow. You will see that there are some templates available for capturing the data from the form to SharePoint, however, it currently doesn't include the attachments. I will be starting from a blank automated flow. Click on Create and then select Automated Flow. I prefer to start from scratch with flows, however you can select a trigger from the list. To have the flow run whenever a form is submitted, we need to select the trigger when a new response is submitted. We can then select the form ID from the list. The form ID will just be the name of the form that we created earlier. We can now add the first step to the flow. For this one, we need to add the Apply to Each control. This will allow us to capture the results from the submitted form. In the Select Output field, choose the list of response notifications from the dynamic content window. Then select Add an Action and choose Get Response Details and select the Form ID from the drop-down and the Response ID from the dynamic content window. Now we can add another action to save the response to the Sharepoint list. Find the Create Item action for Sharepoint. Select the site in the site address field, then select the list name that you want to add the response to. You should then get a list of columns from the Sharepoint list. Initially, I'm only going to add the person's name to the title field. Click on the Save button to save your flow. Now, to make sure that the response is saving correctly, you can resubmit a response through the form. It will be handy to include attachments to this response. To see if the flow triggered correctly, you can go back to the flow details page and you should see that the flow triggered. You can then click into the run for the flow and see the details for the flow. We will use information from this screen shortly. Now go over to the Sharepoint list and you should see a new record. If you click on the record, you will see that there are no attachments yet. We will work on that next. The next step is to add the attachments. In order to do this, we can go back to the flow. If we click on the Get Response Details from the previous run, the output section will show the details for the attachments. The details will appear as a long string, which in fact is JSON. To edit the flow again, click on the Edit button at the top right. Expand the Apply to each section and select Add an Action. In order for Flow to be able to use the details for the attachments, we need to convert the JSON from the response details. We can do this with the Pass JSON action. Search for the Pass JSON action in the list of available options. Add the Upload Attachments response to the content field and enter the schema for the JSON. I will include a link to the schema so that you just copy and paste it in. The next step we need to do is to retrieve the content of the file from OneDrive and add it to the list item in Sharepoint. To do this, select Add an Action and search for OneDrive. In this case, I'll be using OneDrive for Business. Then select the Get File Content action. In the File field, select the ID from the Dynamic Content window. This is the ID of the file that has been saved to OneDrive. When you select the ID field, the Get File Content action will be wrapped in an Apply to Each loop automatically. This is in case there is more than one attachment. We can now add the action, which will save the attachment to the item created in Sharepoint in earlier steps. Add the Add Attachment action from Sharepoint. Select the site address and list name. Then select the ID from the Dynamic Content window. This is the ID from the item we created in Sharepoint earlier. In the File Name field, select the name from the Pass JSON action. This will contain the name of the file the user attached. You may also choose to create your own name for the file. However, if multiple files are being attached, you'll need to have a name that is unique for each file included in the response. Then in the File Content field, select the File Content option from the Dynamic Content window. Once this is done, you can save your flow. In order to test your flow to make sure that everything is working as expected, you can either resubmit a new response in the form, or you can go to the Test option and select Use Data from Previous Run, and then select the previous run from the list of options. Once the flow is finished running, you should now be able to go to the item in the Sharepoint list and see the files attached. Hopefully you found this video helpful and provided you with some ideas on how you can use Flow and Microsoft Forms together. If you did, please like or subscribe to my channel to see more videos on using Flow to help streamline everyday processes.